I do think it's an opportune time to be able to look at the college football playoff, the timeline for expansion, and the formats that we are discussing and debating, because in 2 weeks from today, as we sit here and record, we are going to have the college football playoff managers, or the bosses, or the people who leave their hats at the doors or vote without their conscience and recuse themselves. All the important people that will decide the future of the college football playoff. They're going to get back together on March 2nd. This week, we got a letter from American Athletic Conference Commissioner Mike Oresco that pinned to all of college football. I was happy to receive it. Really
it's
felt
a book, not a letter.
I felt honored that I was on the college football mailing list for Mike Oresco. That we had Jim Phillips shortly after talks broke down at the national championship game, discussing all of the ACC's opposition to this. To me, there seemed like there's two big topics. First, that Phillips was pushing, and then Oresco was pushing back on. Oresco, based on my read of things, wants to expand to the initial proposal of college football playoff expansion as it was proposed in July of last year. Jim Phillips is calling for a 365-day holistic review of college athletics, including college football playoff expansion. Danny, like you mentioned, it was a book, which means that you're part of the Readers Club. You checked it out just like I did. As a classic Northeast guy, he had to talk about the AL East and the Yankees and the Red Sox and try to, pull examples from other sports. But in these arguments from Oresco, which do you think that you find yourself supporting the most?
The only one I support is the overall overarching, we need expansion. Like, I agree with him on that. He could not have picked a worse year to be making this case for a number of reasons. Like, because he even referenced in the letter, like, brand favorability, like the big brands get favorable treatment. Well, we just saw Cincinnati get in, so you could use that before this year and use UCF as your prime example. Look, we beat Auburn in the bowl. Like, we're just as good as everybody else, and we still got left out. Well, you actually had a seat at the table this year. And not only did you have a seat at the table, and I thought they represented themselves well. So I don't want to pick on Cincinnati, because I thought they held themselves with more than they earned their respect in that game. But we all watched it. Like, they got bullied a little bit, and the score was close, but it really didn't feel close. So I disagree. Like, I think it's a bad timing. And then the other thing that I really take issue with is he said we need to stop using the terms Power 5 and Group of 5. Mm-hmm. So I don't agree with that, because I do think there is delineation. And then, oh, by the way, his conference, which he might have had a better case before, 3 biggest brands in his conference and the 3 best football programs are all leaving it. So I just feel like a year ago, this letter would have made a little bit more sense. But this year, it just feels like he's just making the argument because we have this meeting coming up.
I mean, all these commissioners are going to act in their own interest, right? Oresco's putting this out there because he wants to not see, further exclusion from the P5 for his league, which is the best G5 league. And I agree with Danny that you do need to use that terminology, because there's a big difference in the level of talent, in my opinion, on average. I mean, you have some outlier teams, but on average, there is. Jim Phillips is out here calling for the family meeting, right? Like, hey, I know you guys think we need to do this, but we need to have a little family meeting here. We need to look at exactly how this house is run, and let's cut through the BS there, right? The ACC has a contract that's going to bury that league if it doesn't get ripped up at some point, and them voting for 12 basically all but guarantees Notre Dame will not join the ACC. So they're pushing for 8, and Greg Sankey wants 12 because right now he can get half of the playoff revenue to his schools, and under an 8-team playoff, there's no way the SEC would get 4 out of 8, but they could get. I'm not going to go as far as say they could get 6 out of 12, but I think there's a chance they could, in some years, get 4 or 5 out of 12 potentially, especially as they expand to a 16-team Super League. So everybody's just going to act in the interest that makes their schools the most money, because that's literally what they're paid to do. They're paid by the presidents of those leagues to make the most money for those schools.
So ACC and Big Ten seem to be behind 8. Oresco seems like 8 is dead in the water. And if I was to just test the wind. I would say the 8 doesn't have a lot of momentum, that it might be a chip, it might be a play.
Yes, 100% chip.
But we are talking about 12, and the fight to me seems about whether it's 5+1 or 6-6. What Mike Oresco supports is the initial proposal, which is the 6 highest ranked conference champions get automatic bids to the 12-team college football playoff. The ACC and maybe the Big Ten might be in lockstep with this as well. They specifically want the 5+1, where all of the Power 5 conferences are going to be guaranteed with the one highest ranked group of 5. We talked about the flatline 6, no qualifiers. Could be bad news for the ACC, could be bad news for the Big 12, could be bad news for the Pac-12, depending on what kind of season the American Athletic Conference champion, the Mountain West champion. Hey, I mean, look at the Sun Belt right now. Like, the Sun Belt champion could end up bumping them out. I don't think that I have a favorability one way or the other, but do you get a sense on the fight around automatic qualifiers, like which way this thing might end up going, or what's actually important in that fight?
I am not really convinced that the ACC and the Big Ten genuinely want that, but I think they may just be throwing it up to stall this thing to get other things that they do want, right? Like, I've run this scenario in my head. Increasingly, voters are becoming much better at incorporating strength of schedule. I believe that the chance that a second non-Power 5 team gets in over like a Big 12 champ or an ACC champ, or especially a Big 10 champ, is almost nil, right? Unless you have like one of those crazy upsets or something, which is possible, but I think unlikely in most years. I don't really get I don't think on its merits it makes a lot of sense, Chip. I think it's sort of a bargaining chip. Like, actually, we want these guaranteed. We're saying chip a lot today. I think they're saying, hey, we want these guaranteed bids as opposed to just the top 6 conference champions. I think they're in either way.
Is the guarantee for money? Like, if we're talking about the units that get paid out for playoff teams, like Power 5 wants to be like, hey, like, we are the big draw. We are putting all the games on television in the biggest windows, and we therefore want to be able to guarantee a certain piece of this college football playoff pie. The best way to do it is to know that no matter what happens, our conference champion is going to be there. And if it is an upset, if there is that, the 7-5 team that wins a bunch of tiebreakers with the 5-3 conference record, and they pull off the upset against your best team in the conference, then you at least are going to have that team. But then more than likely, that other team's going to end up getting an at-large bid. So it seems like a little bit of insurance and a little bit of defense, and perhaps an opportunity that even in the worst case scenario, you end up getting paid out double.
So you think it's a protection of the upset winner, making sure they get in?
And the argument being that we are college football, Power 5 conferences, sure. All of the hype for the college football playoff is built up on the product that we are putting in during the regular season. And for us to be disadvantaged in any way for this tournament is not fair, considering the current status of the sport.
Yeah, I mean, it could, in theory, devalue the conference championship games at the P5 level if the winner is not guaranteed to get in, especially if you have a scenario in which, like,
aren't they already
upset?
Aren't they already devalued if you have losers getting in?
Oh,
but you already have losers getting in.
That's what I'm saying. Like, I'm saying why does that matter? It doesn't matter now.
I think it's the basic sell to a fan. The win and you're in. Come to Levi Stadium, like a college football playoff, and you're selling tickets in September and October and November and December, and you're running the commercials. It's like the day that a college football playoff contender will be named or will be crowned will be at our conference championship game. I think they love the addition that brings to the pageantry. And I'm actually pageantry, because it's not like we've been going on for decades and decades and decades with conference championship games, but the hype around their conference championship games, I think that's a big selling point.
Agreed. But to me, it's never a true playoff until you say, hey, win this game and you're locked to go there. If it's the counterpart is we'll lose and your season is over. And I don't know how to do that without including the conference championship games in the playoff scenario, which I actually wouldn't hate, but then it eliminates the 2 teams from one conference argument.
Yeah.
which I do think is necessary. Especially if you go to 12, like you can't justify saying, well, the SEC only gets one or the Big Ten only gets one. You just can't. So I don't know what the solution is on the way there, except for blowing the whole thing up in its entirety. But I did like the 12 team that they came up with of the 63 options that they were given by the consulting group, which is the true number. That was the number of different scenarios they were given.
Billable hours, undefeated.
Absolutely, right?
60, we could come up 63 with options. Come on.
Right?
I'm not paying for that.
We could do it if you build for those hours. I liked it. Like, I think it answered a lot of the questions that are out there for protecting the regular season. Like, because that's a big pushback for expansion. Well, the regular season won't matter. Well, and the conference championships won't matter. Like, those were protected by having, a home field advantage potentially in a round one, by having a bye, by not having automatic qualifiers. Like, a lot of these things were protected indirectly, I thought, in response to the criticism they've been getting. But the thing I've kind of resigned to is there's no perfect, or there won't be a true playoff that we're going to see. I wish we could, but I think we have to kind of go with the best of what we're given.
What about the length of the season arguments? Because they're
so dumb.
All right, I'll roll my eyes at the, it could be 17 games. And when you're trying to use that as the core of your argument, I don't have as much in that as much as I do some of these players who had started at media days last year were like, dude, I don't want to play any more games. It's so hard. Our bodies are beat up. Like, by the teams that have been in the college football playoff, when the players who have been in those locker rooms are like, I can't imagine playing another game. That is what I give a little bit more credence to necessarily than somebody in a nice suit who's telling me about the probabilities of someone making it from that first round all the way to the championship game. Do you think that there are adjustments to the game of football that are going to be tied to college football playoff expansion?
So I'm not married to the idea of 12 regular season games. Like, if that was really a hang up, but I don't think we're going backwards. Like, I don't think there's too much money. Correct. But don't you feel like when we get this announcement and with the shifting landscape that we're seeing, that the players are going to be getting paid, and maybe it's playoff bonus money, maybe it's something, but they might just be directly employees, and then that argument kind of falls by the wayside?
I think that have you heard the side of this, which is like, well, we could keep the clock running on first down. We could keep the clock running, and
just make it NFL rules. Would absolutely speed it up. Less plays.
The implementation of that leads us to less plays. And that is that takes so much coordination at the high level of, the NCAA rules committee versus, the college football playoff expansion. But clearly there are a lot of the same people that are operating in all of these rooms. And that is one thing that I have sensed, is that the workaround to health and safety is to change college football and limit the number of plays that are in a game, because like you mentioned, Danny, we're not going back in the number of games for a regular season because that is so huge to the television contracts, but we can change the number of plays in a game. And in doing so, there's going to be impact on up-tempo offenses. There's going to be impact on the television viewing windows. It's fan, it's player, it's coach. I have always gotten the idea that coaches would push back on it. And my guess is, and I want y'all, coaches just like reps, right? We just would like the opportunity to get as many reps as possible because we can't coach these guys all the time. There's hour limits on how much we can see. And so anything that you're going to do to limit the number of plays limits the number of tape, the number of experience, the number of reps that I get to see out of my team. But I think that the administrators will be wholly in support of this just because they can sell it on the health and safety angle.
Can I play a clip from Keith Jackson on this?
Sure.
From 1983. So this is 40 years old. I dropped this in the group chat over Christmas. I found this old game. I'm not going to tell you guys what game because I want to do some more stuff with this.
You're not going to get anything done on it until, one, we eliminate this nonsense of arguing that it's going to cripple the academic circumstances. Because you know, and I know, that's just a smokescreen. There's nothing to it. The Rose Bowl is probably the key to the whole thing. Because the Rose Bowl this year will pay more than $10 million. Next year, more than $11 million. Next year after that, $12 million.
So is he projecting the fights that are coming?
No, they're arguing about the college football playoff at halftime of this game that he was calling back when he worked for ABC. It was him, and I believe I think that's Frank Broyles. Almost has to be. I don't really know what Frank Broyles looks like, but I know he and Broyles were a long time combo back then. We've been arguing about the same damn stuff for 40 years now. Keith Jackson just like, screw it. It's Christmas. I've probably had a couple. I mean, I don't know if he drank. I assume he did. Certainly if you're calling this game that I'm looking at, you and you're away from your family, you probably are having a couple. And he just lets it fly, man. Like, look, as the players get paid more, and they will. I know we'll be discussing an article in the coming weeks that saying like, hey, you need to have at least 10 million for your recruiting class now. And that number's only going to go up. I think that the whole too many games argument is largely going to go away, but it wouldn't shock me if they try to limit some of the no huddle stuff.
See, I would much rather, because you can still go no huddle with.
You can still go no huddle, right? It's just
I would much rather, as opposed to putting some sort of limitations on how many number of plays you can run. Or
no, you won't have that.
No, you can't do that. But I do think the NCAA, who bad, like you talk about an organization that could use an easy win. I think if they stepped up to the plate and were like, yep, in the name of player safety, that's a win. We're going to go ahead and we're going to amend our clock rules, and the way that, it's a very simple, we're going to follow the NFL's rules, and, maybe we'll put in a 2-minute warning. And I think for continuity's sake, it makes it easier to make that transition for a lot of players. I know for me, it was like a difference. Like the game moves a lot faster in between plays, but I think fans would actually like it, because as much as we love college football, I still hear diehard college football fans say, do we really need a 4.5-hour game? Like, so if you could get the science of college football down the way the NFL has, tight 3-hour and 15-minute windows, I think the NCAA could get an easy win. And I do think the conferences would support it, I think, because I don't know why they would push back on it.
Don't you also have a longer halftime in college due to
Yes.
the nature of the halftime show with
the band,
both bands playing?
Yeah.
Is it really?
Oh, yeah, it's significantly longer.
Yeah.
Like the NFL is a 12-minute tight.
I
Like,
didn't know it was 12.
Oh, it's 12. And I think, college, I don't know the official time, if there even is one, but it's kind of looser. It's definitely at least 20.
Yeah, standard is
it might
20
be-
or 25.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, so there's 10 minutes right there. And we've had so many like clock changes in the history of this sport. I mean, like we talk about going back to the 90s. They ran comparable number of plays per game in the 90s pretty often, right? And then you had certain rules in the early 2000s that really made it crazy tight. And then some of those they backed off because they realized that they made it too tough. I wrote something on this back in the SB Nation days. I'll see if I can find it. But like it was not just, hey, all of a sudden we're running a whole lot of plays in the game. Back in the 90s and sometimes in the 80s, you would have teams running 70 plays a game. You didn't often have the 90, which is where some of the up-tempo craziness, sort of exploitation of the current rules comes in, I guess. But who knows? It's going to be interesting. Shout out to Keith Jackson, RIP.
Yeah, he's still he always was the voice of college football and continues to be with the comments even 40 years into the future. So there's the 1-year delay. There is a meeting coming up 2 weeks from today. There are so many angles and so many power players that are fighting. The initial thought was that the national championship weekend was going to be the last chance to be able to get this thing in for the 2024 or the 2025 season. Of course, at the end of the 2025 season, the first contract runs out. If there's a delay here, then we're not going to see any college football playoff expansion until 2026. What is your expectation?
Really don't know.
I think the contract runs out.
So you think Jim Phillips, does he hold all the cards here? Like, is he the one that's holding this up?
Sankey likes 4. And that's the thing is like, he's just like, hey, listen, I know that I'm in charge of this expansion proposal, but we've told you the whole time, we're cool with 4. This is
but
good.
Isn't he also, I know he's fine with 4 because they get in 2, but isn't he also a pretty strong proponent of expansion?
Yeah, he's
but only to a number that allows him to keep having like multiple plurality of the teams.
Yeah.
Right. I talked to him. So I talked to Sankey on the field before the national championship game. And it was the day or the day of or the day after they had these meetings. And you could tell he was like, this was a bad day. He's like, this was a setback. He's like, this was not, he's like, we hit another roadblock. He's like, it's frustrating, so I heard some of that frustration from him. But isn't it funny how these benchmarks keep getting put in place? Is like, well, if it doesn't get, because it was the first week of December. And then it was like, well, we'll reconvene at the national championship game. And then it was like, oh, it's done. We're definitely not expanding. And then they have one more. It's like, well, maybe there's a sliver of hope. There's so much money at stake. I just wonder if they'll have the patience to sit around and wait for the entirety. I think this is delaying it, but I don't think we run out the full, 5 more years till 2025, 26? Is it 4 more years? How long?
We were about to have the 2022 season and the 2023 season. Based on my understanding, those 2 seasons will be a 14 playoff based on the rotation of the bowls. Like it's like that will be 4-team. 2024 and 2025, those next 2 seasons could be a 12-team playoff, could be the beginning of a rotation of the 12-team playoff. But because of trying to give all the bowls the same amount of whatever, if it doesn't happen by a certain point in time for it to be both for 2024 and 2025, the expectation is that they would just start fresh with the 2026 season.
So I think this comes down to a couple things. Number one, can the ACC hold out long enough to get this thing to where there are more providers than just ESPN bidding on it, right? Because if you expand now, ESPN gets to keep it, right? So that's a major aspect in this. I think that is where he has an alignment with George Klakoff, obviously, because the guy's been in media and understands the value, like the NFL does, of having a whole lot of different rights holders. I mean, CBS makes a ton of money on the NFL and also spends a lot. So does ESPN and NBC and Amazon.
YouTube.com/cover3 wants a piece of this. Okay.
Right.
We would at least like to be invited to the table to bid on the college football playoff. I cannot disclose what our bid is going to be. That's a violation of a lot of our own privacy, but
we will bid.
We would like to make a bid for the college football playoff.
It also begs the question here. The ACC obviously desperately needs money. And do you think the other conferences will say, hey, here's a little hush money in exchange for your vote? I think they could in a short term, right? Like a little short-term payoff to get the ACC to shut up and just vote yes on this thing. I mean, if they're all making more money, what would the problem be with them flipping a little extra cash to the ACC in the deal in the short term? Now, I think it'd be a bad move for the ACC because it means they're not going to get Notre Dame, obviously, if they vote for the 12. But I think they could pay them off.
That would be ridiculous.
Just negotiations.
I know.
What do you think is more likely, though, that because the ACC, clearly their TV contract is restrictive. I mean, it is a bad deal. I'm kind of blown away at how bad it is.
Yeah, they're screwed long term.
They're screwed long term. ESPN doesn't want to let it get to 26. Is there a way that ESPN comes to the ACC and says, hey, look, let's try to make everybody happy. Let's keep it in-house, though. And maybe they rework their TV deal? Like that, to me, seems almost more likely than the hush money under the table. That if, but then, because I think ESPN's incentive is we want to get this reworked before it goes to all those other bidders.
Correct.
And so like there might be incentive for ESPN to go to the ACC and say, yeah, this isn't good. Like we get it. We want to try to help you out. You got to help us out. Let's get this all figured out together. We'll make you more equitable to what, I don't know how close they'll get. That's another negotiation that has to take place, but we'll make it closer and more fair, aligned with the Big Ten and the SEC. Like, I think that's a scenario that would be a best case scenario for Jim Phillips, I think, and the ACC. And I think it would be the best case scenario for ESPN too.
That's probably what the athletic directors are thinking in the back of their head. When Jim Phillips is able to say, we are unanimously opposed to approving expansion right now, those athletic directors are like, we are not going to enter into any long-term deals beyond the one that we're already stuck with. Whatever new long-term deal we agree with needs to change our financial reality in a major way. And you're right, Danny. It might not be hush money from other conferences. It might be fix-it money from ESPN just to be able to get everyone on the same page.